President Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, is expected to be sentenced today. He's facing years in prison after being convicted of tax and bank fraud last summer.
Manafort's lawyers have asked for a reduced sentence for the 69-year-old, citing his poor health. But the special counsel's office isn't buying it, saying Manafort's history of criminal conduct should not be overlooked. For more on this, we're joined by CBS News Washington correspondent Paula Reid, as well as CBSN legal contributor and former assistant U.S. attorney in New York's Eastern District. Keir, let me start with you first. What is the judge going to be looking for here when sentencing Manafort? What are the parameters?
Okay, so he's going to be looking at several things. He's going to be looking at the sentencing guidelines. He's going to be, which is this big calculation we've been talking about, and he's going to be looking to see whether or not Mr. Manafort has accepted responsibility, whether he is somebody who has effectively learned his lesson. Those are sort of the core factors. In addition, whether or not Mr. Manafort continues to be a danger, whether he's somebody who can be expected to continue to commit crimes after he's released, and also whether how much of a signal needs to be sent to everybody else to generally deter other people from thinking about doing crimes like this.
So, Paula, still in that vein with Keir, so we know that Manafort's lawyers have requested a reduced sentence, but the special counsel's office has submitted a response objecting to that, saying that, Manafort has a criminal history and that should not be overlooked. So, any idea how we think this might play out today?
This will be quite a hearing, because remember, this is a judge who loves to opine from the bench. He made a lot of politically charged statements during Manafort's trial. Now, the criminal history they are referring to here are, of course, the crimes he was convicted of over the summer. Those stretch back to 2010. The big thing we're looking for today is whether or not Manafort will make any statement in his own defense to try to convince the judge that he is remorseful and that he doesn't necessarily need to send a message through a really harsh sentence. Manafort did not take the stand in his own defense during his trial. It remains to be seen whether or not he takes that option today to defend himself, but I think it's pretty unlikely. The long game here is someone angling for a pardon. More likely we just get maybe a paper statement from his lawyers or something from them in person.
And Keir, the other issue, of course, is that Manafort has been found to have lied several times in the past. How do we expect the judge will take that into consideration?
Well, first of all, I agree with what Paula just said, that one of the key things here is to see what, if anything, Mr. Manafort says. This sentencing is going to be somewhat complicated. My takeaway from his brief was that, frankly, the arguments, most of them that he made, weren't really going to move the judge very much. He's complaining that that the government was spreading misinformation about him. That's just not going to go over well with a judge that watched all this evidence come in. A jury, unanimous jury, convicted him. He seems to be taking away his opportunity for there's this one last shot at cooperation after you're sentenced. Manafort seems to be throwing that aside. The other thing is that he's pointing out the fact that he was not charged or convicted of anything relating to collusion, and arguing that the special counsel shouldn't have even been involved in the case because of that. The judge has already rejected that argument, allowed the trial to go forward, and it's particularly rich. Getting back now to the lies that you just mentioned, is one of the lies that he's just been found to have told was about Konstantin Kilimnik, this man who has these ties to Russian intelligence, and so there's a lot of difficult facts here for Manafort to deal with.
And I think back to the very beginning, didn't the judge sort of admonish him or punish him for writing an op-ed under someone else's name to basically sort of send a message out there to try and influence the general public about their opinion on him? He's kind of operating, he's trying to dig himself out of a hole, essentially, is what I'm trying to say with a judge like this.
Well, it almost seems to me like part of his arguments aren't even directed at the judge. It looks to me like some of these arguments may be directed to President Trump. And I think that is not a particularly effective strategy when you are in front of the judge who's about to sentence you. And let's remember, this is only the first sentencing here. Judge Jackson in the District of Columbia will sentence him next, and she can stack potentially a 10-year sentence on top of whatever Judge Ellis does today in the Eastern District of Virginia.
Which brings us to you, Paula, and what is the likelihood of Manafort getting a pardon, because it certainly seemed like from the beginning that might have been his play here. Hope that the president will pardon him ultimately.
That was always his long game. A source close to his case confirmed to me that is why he went to trial. Anyone who looked at the evidence that was stacked against him and the cooperating witnesses would have very likely decided to enter a plea deal. But instead, he decided to play the long game. He spent the money, the emotional expenditure to fight these charges. Of course, he lost. He was convicted because he wanted to appeal to the president, ultimately to be pardoned. That is his best chance of not spending the rest of his life in jail. Now, in his second case here in Washington, he did eventually agree to cooperate with the special counsel, mostly because he couldn't afford to fight through another lengthy trial. But even in that, he didn't fully cooperate. The special counsel accuses him of lying. So this appears to be someone who is playing for an audience of one. His best chance of not spending the rest of his life behind bars is a presidential pardon. The president has said that is something he has not taken off the table. But even if the president was to pardon Manafort, that does not insulate him from any state-level charges or state investigations that could come his way.
I want to clarify the op-ed. He tried to write an op-ed using a ghostwriter. I don't think he was successful, but that's what the prosecutors were claiming.
Paula, staying on the subject of presidential pardons, I want to ask you about your reporting regarding Michael Cohen. His lawyers say he directed his previous attorney to look into the possibility of a presidential pardon. What more can you tell us?
That's right. There's a little confusion because during his testimony, Cohen testified that he had never sought a pardon from the president, nor would he want one. But then there were reports that one of his previous attorneys before Lanny Davis had approached the president's legal team about the possibility of a pardon after Cohen's home and offices were raided by the FBI. Now, Lanny Davis has come out with a few different statements this morning, but one of them does not deny that. He said, yes, Cohen asked his attorneys to explore the possibility of a pardon. Lanny Davis argues that is not a contradiction with what he testified to. I think Lanny Davis is trying to make the very sort of tricky legal argument that Cohen said he didn't ask the president for a pardon, but of course we've now learned that he did ask or seek out the possibility from the president's legal team. But ultimately, Cohen is probably not going to get a pardon at all. He is, of all the people here, he is the least likely to actually be rewarded with a pardon at the end of all this.
Tricky legal argument, Paula?
Very tricky. I think very tricky, very narrow. I think it's semantics. And he's had to clean up a little bit of what Cohen said during his hearing. He also accused the president's attorney, Jay Sekulow, of altering his testimony and being the one who was responsible for him originally lying to Congress. Now they've sort of backed off that, too. So what Congress would have to establish is whether or not Cohen should have known that he was lying at the time, if this was intentional, if it's willful, and whether or not they want to go back at him for being dishonest before Congress.
All right. Always learn something new with you, including a new word today. Thank you very much, Paula Reid at the White House, and Keir right here in the studio with us. Thank you both. We appreciate it.